Welcome back, boxing fans. So I just listened to a video of course, somebody doing what they do, accusing me of moving goalposts. Well, what he is doing is deflecting, constantly deflecting. So I'm not the only person who's been critical of the fact that at 30 years old, Tank Davis still hasn't got a career-defining fight on his resume. His most career-defining fight is when he fought a fighter from another platform in Ryan Garcia, a guy who's never been a world champion and may retire if he gets beat by Devin Haney. So how good of a win will that actually be for him? Financially, it was a great win, like we said it would be. Me saying that the Frank Martin fight is an in-house fight isn't criticizing PBC for making in fights, it's pointing out a truism. The PBC would rather make in-house fights with its opponents than make fights that boxing fans want. Everybody knows that. Everybody talks about it. But of course, this guy is going to ignore and deflect, which is what he does. The reality is, there's a few fights out there that people really wanted to see Tank Davis in. A Devin Haney fight, but of course, he can't go up to 140 pounds to make a Devin Haney fight. A Shakur Stevens fight, but he can't, well, he is at 135. Even potentially chasing after a Lomachenko. Teo, when Teo was at this weight class, even potentially moving up to challenge Teo at 140. Those four fights would be the biggest, most highlighted, defining fight of Tank Davis's career. The irony is this guy deflects and talks about, well, if Tank Davis is ducking, how come he's not talking about Canelo Alvarez? Canelo Alvarez. So Canelo Alvarez is ducking who? Literally, again, guys are comparing Tank Davis to Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez is 3 years older than Tank Davis. Soon to be 4, maybe. He is a 4-weight world champion who's currently undisputed at 168 pounds, was a 3-belt unified champion at middleweight, has a far better resume than any active boxer in the sport today, has beat multiple pound-for-pound fighters, and has faced legendary fighters. But he's the guy ducking, not the guy who is a 1-weight world champion who was just elevated by the WBA, giving him his 2nd weight division. He didn't beat somebody to win a title. He basically just inherited a belt because the guy before him retired, moved up in weight, passed away. However you inherit things, that's how Tank Davis inherited his title. Didn't even fight someone to win it. He was just elevated into that title, right? So now he's currently a 2-weight world champion, has never unified titles at any weight class ever, right? And unifying titles is a highlighted accomplishment in the sport of boxing, because what it means is you're not winning fucking vacant titles, you're not winning titles, email titles, you're actually beating champions to win titles. When you unify titles, that's what you're doing. You're beating another champion. You're putting your belt up against his, right? That is something all great fighters have done in the sport of boxing. But now, of course, if you expect Tank Davis to do what every great fighter in boxing has done beforehand, you're being too hard on him. You're being disrespectful to him. Yet guys like this guy consistently shits on Golovkin, who was a unified champion 2 different times. Shits on Lomachenko, who was a unified champion, right? Shits on Roman Gonzalez, who was a 4-weight world champion. Like, he accuses everyone of being a racist, yet the only person that's a racist here is this dude, who gives no one respect for anything. And right now, of course, he's leaving comments saying his last fight was against Ryan Garcia, who's a Golden Boy fighter. Yes, and you only prove my point. When he actually fights somebody that isn't an in-house fight, he had huge success, huge success. Wouldn't that tell you that the best way for him to be successful is to continue doing that, fighting the big names from different platforms in huge mega fights and big pay-per-view fights that are going to pay you huge amounts of money? How much money do you think he's going to get from a 300,000 pay-per-view versus Frank Martin? Frank Martin isn't going to generate a lot of pay-per-view buys for Tank Davis. Sorry, he's not. The best thing we can say about him fighting Frank Martin is that Frank Martin hasn't fought for a year, so he's been super inactive. So there you go. That's a good reason for Tank Davis to jump on him. He also looked terrible in his last fight against a European, or as guys like this guy and other American YouTubers call Europeans, a Eurobum, right? A Eurobum that if anyone else fought would be criticized and shit on. But of course, because Frank Martin fought him, he gets praised. You know, this guy will twist everything into a racial narrative, right? Oh, no one praised Tank Davis for beating Petraza. Not true at all. People all praised him for being a 21-year-old, beating Petraza, coming out of nowhere, and stopping a guy to become a champion. It's just after doing that, then people said, oh, he's young. He shouldn't have to fight Lomachenko, right? You remember that? Like, literally, this is what people were saying, acting as if somehow Tank Davis at 21 years old was the youngest fucking champion in boxing history. No, he wasn't. The youngest boxing champion in history was 16 years old, Benitez. Literally 5 years younger than Tank Davis was when he won a title. When Mike Tyson was 21 years old and was the heavyweight champion after winning his title, what did he do? Did he duck all the other champions to fight a bunch of in-house opponents to turn himself into a pay-per-view star? Or did he chase every single champion to unify all those titles to become the undisputed heavyweight champion in boxing? Well, we know what the truth to that story is. And by pointing this out, somehow I'm hating on Tank Davis. No, I've said tons of things about Tank Davis that have been positive. I talk about how I like his style. I think he's a great fighter, and I think he has everything in his toolbox to be one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in boxing. But to do that, you need to beat a Shakur Stevenson. You need to beat an old Vasily Lomachenko. You need to beat a bigger Devin Haney. You need to beat a Teofimo Lopez. Those are the kind of names you need to beat to solidify yourself as a pound-for-pound top fighter in the sport of boxing. You fight a guy like Frank Martin, who's literally never beaten a top 10 opponent in his career. What accolades do you hope to accomplish from that? How much praise do you think you're going to get from it? And I ain't hating on him for taking on the fight, because it's a good opponent. It's the first black American opponent he's ever fought. But the funny thing is, this same dude criticized Keyshawn Davis for fighting Petraza, criticized Teofimo Lopez for fighting Ortiz, is criticizing Lomachenko from fighting Kambosos. All three of those fighters as opponents are better than Frank Martin. Kambosos was the unified champion. Petraza was a two-weight world champion. Ortiz at least beat a champion when he beat Jamal Herring, and then many people feel he beat Lomachenko. I don't think that, but the haters do. So he fought a pound-for-pound fighter in Lomachenko and gave him a very, very tough test. What's the best thing we can say about Frank Martin? That he fought a guy that looked like Muhammad Ali, and he beat a Eurobum, even though the first half of that fight he was getting outboxed, right? See, this is the problem with a guy like him. He will man defend and turn everything racist and pull out Golovkin and talk about how Golovkin didn't do anything. Well, Golovkin fought a pound-for-pound fighter 3 different times. At this point, Tank Davis, who's 30 years old, has never fucking fought a pound-for-pound fighter. And the way his career is being maneuvered, he may never fight a pound-for-pound fighter. Right? And this is the criticism people have towards the PBC, Mayweather, and everybody else attached and associated with Tank Davis. when he was offered a huge fight opportunity to fight Devin Haney in Saudi Arabia. His team did the same thing with that offer that they did with the potential Lomachenko fight. Every time there's a big fight available, they walk the other way. You say, oh, Canelo's ducking David Benavidez. It's like, give me a fucking break. Give me a break, man. David Benavidez is a good fighter, but at this point, he hasn't done anything to prove that he's a great fighter. Canelo could retire. He's a Hall of Famer. He don't need David Benavidez. David Benavidez needs him. If David Benavidez beats Canelo, now he's legitimized. But Canelo doesn't need Benavidez to legitimize himself. Tank Davis is not at the level of Canelo Alvarez. And you bringing up a retired Golovkin, give me a fucking break. Give me a break. When Golovkin was running to the fire at his weight class, Tank Davis was running away from the fire. Literally. When he unifies a title, fucking call me. When he fights a pound-for-pound fighter, call me. When he fights a guy that people actually believe could beat him, call me. Until those things happen, people are going to have expectations for him to do those things. And if he doesn't, people are going to be disappointed in the way his career is being maneuvered. Even the guys you love, the LDBC, are highly critical of Tank Davis. And you know who doesn't make videos criticizing the LDBC for being critical of Tank Davis? You. That's who. Of course, if it was me, you'd point that out and you'd say, how come he doesn't criticize these people who are hateful towards Golovkin, a fighter he likes? Well, the same can be said for you. The reality is, you're still making videos about me. My channel is hard to find now, but still, you find it enough that you're making videos about it. Just because you're not mentioning my name, everybody knows that you're still clout chasing off of me. You leaving a stupid comment on my comment was truthful. I said, oh, it's not a surprise Tank Davis is fighting another in-house opponent, because literally that's what he's done his whole career, and that's what fucking Al Haymon and the PBC have resigned themselves to doing. Giving us fights that aren't what boxing fans want, but are in-house fights that the PBC can use to do whatever they do with their fights, right? You know, this is consistent. And you can deny this, you can ignore it, you can talk about how other platforms are doing in-house fights too. Yeah, of course they are. Nobody's denying that. Nobody's saying they're not. But the one funny thing is, when you're throwing Canelo Alvarez's name into this conversation, Canelo Alvarez literally has crossed over to make big fights. He's literally crossed over to fight world champions. He's literally unified titles by crossing to the other side of the street. Tank Davis, he ain't even fucking willing to get out of bed to make a fucking fight boxing fans care about. The biggest fight he made was against a guy who he pulled down in weight and put a rehydration clause on.